Welcome to Horror in Detail, the channel that delves into the darkest corners of true crime, bringing you bone-chilling and spine-tingling stories of school lockdown. First story. Lockdown at my elementary school. School lockdown drills are now as common as fire drills. I'm sure every school or county has their own style or individual protocol, but essentially, it's the same across the board. Everyone is to get into a classroom, lock the door, turn off the lights, group into a part of the room out of view from the windows and doors, and stay completely silent. The goal is to disappear from whatever hypothetical active shooter is roaming the hallways. Without these drills, well, the same thing would happen as when school shooters first started popping up. Chaos, people fleeing in all directions, creating a frenzy of targets to choose from. And more people would die. More children would die. Was a counselor for an elementary school. My last position was my second, the first being in a hellhole for 2 years. That first elementary school was a mess, mostly because of the principal. He was old and tired, walking the halls with frazzled white hair and wrinkled button-up shirts with no tie. It seemed he was over it all, counting down the days until his retirement. He showed little interest in my role, practically rolling his eyes at whatever issue brought a child to my door. He clearly had the whole "this generation is soft" mentality. Kids aren't depressed or anxious, they're just whining. He handed out reprimands and punishments without any real investigations and treated the staff poorly. And he slacked on drills. I remembered being horrified on my first fire drill there, standing out in the playground in the near-freezing autumn breeze, surrounded by cold and confused students as scattered and disorganized as staff tried to somehow get accountability. The staff and I tried to schedule more drills, tried to get him in on planning, but he could care less. Eventually, he was relieved when teachers had enough and went to the board, but by then I lost motivation and needed a change. Where I ended up next was refreshing. The principal, a tall and slim middle-aged man with a square jaw and kind eyes, always wearing some version of a cartoon-themed tie, and the staff here take their jobs rather seriously, almost to the point of me feeling too intimidated to share ideas during meetings when I first arrived. Fortunately, I loosened up over time, and when everyone saw how much I cared for the children, I was accepted. I loved it there. I quit 2 months later. The reason I quit is something I haven't quite gotten over. I still dream about it. I still hear the sounds. The sounds that didn't make sense as they were happening, but came together afterward into a horrific realization. I had been making my rounds that day, checking on my more needy students during their classes, making sure no one was on the verge of a meltdown or anything. I remember feeling relieved to be walking around because I had been sitting in the nurse's office with a first grader who ran and slipped on the slick floor the custodian was in the middle of mopping. Luckily, there was nothing wrong with the child, but I advised the custodian to put up a "Caution Wet Floors" sign before we had a lawsuit on our hands. I was feeling good until lockdown. 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 It was one of the office administrators over the loudspeaker. At first, I was just surprised. Then I felt my heart jump and my fingertips turn icy as I realized the reason I was surprised. There was no drill scheduled that day, which meant this was not a drill. When the announcement blared, I had just opened the door to peek into a kindergarten classroom. When the overhead speaker clicked, indicating the end of the announcement, my eyes met with the teacher's, Mrs. Jameson. We froze, staring at one another for a good 3 seconds, her standing with a pointer in one hand with her class all neatly seated on the carpet area. The students were silent, some looking at her, and some at me. Then she and I came to some kind of unspoken agreement. Training kicked in. We both sighed casually and smiled down at the kids. Mrs. Jameson said, "Well, kids, looks like we got a lockdown drill. Let's show Ms. Vasquez how well we can do." "Sounds good to me," I said as I closed the door and pulled down the curtain to the door's tiny window. "I'd love to see how this class does during a lockdown drill. I might have some rewards if you do well." Then I remembered something. I said to the teacher, "Janet, I'll be right back," before running out the room. I had remembered the fourth graders were around the corner from where I was, outside their classrooms and scattered all around the hallway, putting up holiday decorations. I was afraid of the chaos that might ensue. Kids pushing and shoving to get back to their own classrooms instead of just ducking into the nearest one, as was protocol. Luckily, it wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. Everyone was calm and well-versed on what to do. I herded some lingering and confused kids into rooms and was about to run back to the kindergarten room when I spotted something out the corner of my eye. When I turned around, I couldn't help but mutter, "Seriously?" At the end of the hallway, sitting just outside the edge of sunlight that casted through the windows of the double-door exit nearby, was a third grader. He was curled up, knees to chest, hood pulled over, but I knew who it was. Charlie. Probably doodling in his damn sketchbook, listening to music even though electronic devices were banned. The school had warned him dozens of times, but he always manages to sneak his phone in. Honestly, I've spotted him a few times with the buds in his ears, but let it go. Music and drawing were his thing, and he had it rough at home. I ran over, pulled his hood back, and yanked the earbuds out his ears. "Lockdown, sweetie. Come on." I was tempted to sound more urgent, but I wanted to remain casual and not alarm him. Charlie, like all students in that school, took lockdown drills seriously. His eyes widened and he jumped up. We ran over to the nearest room, the computer lab, and I used my key to let him in. Then I hesitated. The right thing to do would be to go in with him. But I thought about Mrs. Janet Jameson. She was young, her second year teaching, and her IA was out sick. I felt I had to help her manage those kids. There was no telling how long this lockdown would last, and she needed the help. I closed the door, turned. I realized I was probably the last one still in the hallway. It was eerie, not having another soul in the hallway. It felt abandoned. No, hollow was the right word. It felt like a hollow, like a cave. I heard footsteps. Rhythmic thuds on the linoleum floor. Boots? No, they were softer than that, although too heavy to be sneakers. Or maybe the person making them were big. It was not too far off. I guess I should explain the layout. The school is only one story. From a bird's eye view, the hallways carve out what looks like two cubes close stacked on top of each other, the top being where the entrance was. Those two cubes were fused together by the same middle hallway. I was at the far bottom of the bottom cube, close to the left corner. The footsteps sounded as if coming down the left side of the top cube, so that if I were to turn down that left corner, I'd end up far away yet face to face with whoever was there. The main problem was that Janet Jameson's room was down that left side hallway. I took off my flats and tiptoed to the left corner. I was tempted to look, to just peek, but at the same time was too scared the person would see me. The steps stopped, and I heard a hard rattling. He was trying a door. When it didn't open, I heard him whisper something, probably cursing to himself, before continuing to walk. And it was a him, judging from that whisper. The voice was too deep to be a woman. I don't know why I waited there, listening to the footsteps coming my way. I suppose I wasn't thinking clearly because I could have just went into the nearest room. Yet I had an anxious one-track mind of getting to Mrs. Jameson's room. The man tried another locked door. Another hoarse whisper. I thought I could just sprint to the room, unlock the door, and rush in. No, he'd see me, and that would only draw attention to Mrs. Jameson's room, thus endangering the children. Plus, what if I couldn't get the key in and unlock the door in time before he ran up to me? I took a backward step, preparing to turn and sprint to the right corner if he got too close, when I heard S shift in the echoing steps. I listened and realized he turned down the middle hallway. I drew in a deep breath and exhaled shakily as I braved to peek around the corner. I was right. I saw no one and yet heard another door being tried, so he had to be down that middle hallway. Then, to my surprise, Mrs. Jameson's door opened without a sound. I saw her face appear within the darkness of the room. Our eyes met, and she beckoned me. I didn't hesitate. I didn't want to wait any longer and risk freezing up. I ran and made it in. As soon as I did, Janet carefully closed the door. I saw all the kids clustered in the darkest corner of the room, sitting and staring expectantly at me. "What are you doing?" I whispered harshly to the kindergarten teacher. "You are not supposed to open the door during a lockdown." "Well, you're welcome." She sighed. "I just had a bad feeling because you said you'd be back. Plus, after I heard the last door closed, I heard a couple of your steps. I assumed they were yours because they clicked like shoes, and just knew you were still out there." My shoulders slumped. I could no longer hide my relief or gratefulness. "Thank you, Janet." I saw her teeth show in the dark as she smiled. "No problem. Just help me keep the kids calm and dash." We heard a noise outside. It wasn't close, but it was strange, like a heavy thud. "What's that?" asked one of the kids. We shushed him and listened. Silence. Nothing happened for the next 20 or so minutes. Janet and I handed out coloring books and crayons for the kids to color. We made sure everyone for every color. It sounds petty, but the last thing we needed was kids asking to borrow colors and start bickering over it. One of the little girls didn't color. She just stared at us with worrying and waiting eyes. She knew this wasn't a drill. I sat down in one of the small chairs and I signaled her to come to me. She immediately ran over, sat in my lap, and buried her head into my shoulder. I put my arms around her and whispered reassuring words. The rest of the class noticed this, and unfortunately, it seemed to make them anxious. Just then we heard footsteps. We all stiffened. The steps were coming our way. Janet and I met eyes. She was completely pale. The footsteps seemed heavier and less rhythmic. At one point there was some shuffling and some rubbing or dragging of clothes. The man must have stumbled and slid against the wall. Was he hurt? Then the steps resumed, getting closer still. My eyes shot toward the door. The girl and I gripped each other hard with rigid bodies. We felt almost fused as one statue. There was ringing in my ears, and my eyes burned as I stared unblinkingly at the doorknob. Then bang. It was as if someone threw their weight into the door. The kid screamed. Janet screamed. I almost did, but instead put the girl down and ran over to Janet and shook her by the shoulders. She stopped screaming and I pointed to the horrified children. At that moment, intense weight seemed to come upon us. I felt everything fade away for a moment. The screaming, the darkness of the room, the single heavy knock against the door that followed after the bang. And within our gaze we came to a mutual declaration. The kids. We both thought it. We had to keep them safe. That was all that mattered. The bookshelf, she blurted. I understood and nodded. In response I said, use the blanket, okay? She nodded, also understanding. Then we separated. I ran to the bookshelf and began pushing. It was used to hold other supplies like containers of extra glue sticks and yarn, not books, so it was not as heavy as it could have been. But it was heavy. Shannon. I got it. I got it. The shelf slid across the room, getting easier as I built momentum. The kids were still screaming, but had started to quiet down. I glanced over and saw Janet had already draped the ends of a large green blanket over the coat cubby and another bookshelf, so it hung over everyone, like a makeshift tent. Good. It would give the kids a sense of feeling hidden. She heard Janet trying to talk them down. By now the man was trying the doorknob and I heard a low grunt. I kept pushing and finally, with gritted teeth and every muscle in my body hard as rock, I made it. I turned the shelf the long way and rested it against the door. I turned my back to the shelf and leaned against it. Where's Ms. Vasquez? A child cried out. Then the other kids followed and began anxiously calling out to me. I'm here, guys. I tried to sound casual, but my voice was shaking. You guys are the fort, and I'm the lookout. Janet said, yes, she's the lookout. She'll tell us if we are clear or in danger. Ms. Vasquez, are we clear? Oh, yes. The danger was here, but it passed. We're all clear, kids. As I said this, I prayed there wasn't another thrash against the door. There wasn't. It all stopped. The doorknob stopped jiggling. Silence. After a few minutes, I slid down to sit on the floor, still leaning against the bookshelf. As the silence settled in, and I called out 5 all clears to the kids to offer consistent reassurance, my body began to slow settle. The moment that crash against the door happened, I felt amped up, light on my feet, strong. In fact, I remembered when one of these bookshelves were being moved from one classroom to another. It took 2 custodians, grown men, to slide it along with a struggle. I had managed it alone. It was all adrenaline, and now with the kids calm enough to be singing softly along with Janet under the blanket, I was crashing. To top off my sense of ease, I saw flashing red and blue lights coming in through the window. It was over, and I felt sick. I even smelled copper in the air. I rubbed my nose to check for a nosebleed, but strangely saw nothing. I looked at lights dancing across the ceiling. "Yay, guys," I called in the fakest peppy voice. "The policemen are here." They had seen the lights and were already cheering. I tried to say something else. I can't remember what, but it was probably to remind them they still had to remain quiet. Rather than words, I let out a gut-tightening heave. Not much came out, just enough for me to spit. I felt something. Since I was no longer sweating and my skin felt cold and clammy, I became aware of some warmth beneath me, like I was sitting in a puddle. I frowned. I soiled myself, I thought. Great. I shifted to examine my jeans to see if it was urine or feces. I saw darkness on the beige tile. I hesitantly touched it. It was too thick to be urine, and I didn't smell anything. Or rather, I didn't smell any bodily waste. That coppery scent from earlier was stronger now. As I leaned away from the bookshelf, I saw the liquid hadn't come from me, but from beneath the bookshelf. No, not the bookshelf. It came from under the door. A stone dropped in my chest as I realized what the liquid was. It was blood. Blood had been oozing into the room. What the hell? Noise came from the hallway. The calm rumble of footsteps, deep voices and casual conversation, and chaotic static from walkie-talkies, the police, and it didn't sound like they were in a rush. We all heard them coming closer. Then they stopped walking. They stopped talking. We could only hear the only thing heard were the walkies. Why were they just standing there? Then someone among them broke the silence with a "holy shit" before a storm of urgent footsteps came and stopped right outside Janet Jameson's door. Eventually, the all clear was given to every class except ours. Janet and I didn't protest or ask any questions. We were too confused, too overwhelmed and worn out. We were at a point of absolute submission because we thought obedience would make things go faster and we can just all go home. I asked Janet for the blanket to cover myself and the pool under me before she turned the lights on and allowed the kids to stretch out. I whispered to her about the blood, and she only threw her head back and closed her eyes as if to say, what else? After an hour, the window gates were unlocked. Janet, the kids and I exited the class through the windows so we didn't have to open the door and see whatever was happening. I looked stupidly at one of the officers after climbing out the window and said, "I have blood on me. It's not mine." I just said it. I felt I had to before they noticed it themselves. The officer just nodded grimly, with no sign of surprise. Then he escorted Janet and I to sit at the open end of an ambulance to be examined. When the medics gave the thumbs up, 2 officers came over. At first, they just stood there, heads up but eyes staring at the ground. Then they removed their hats and told us there was a dead body in front of Janet Jameson's classroom door. What do you say to something like that? They paused, as if giving us room to react or respond. Janet and I just looked at one another. They looked at us. What did they want us to say? As it turns out, they weren't waiting for a reaction. They were giving moment to let that news sink in before they hit us with another. This time, we reacted. This time we jumped up, asking what they meant. Asking why and how. We freaked. We acted like they told us the sky just fell. The dead body was the principal. The officers tried to calm us. When we were finally able to sit and listen, One of them offered to explain everything. Then they looked at one another, agreeing on something, before looking directly at me. "We could show you what happened." I tensed up. The other officer quickly added, "From the cameras, he means. You don't have to see him. Watch the recordings." It seemed the invitation was exclusively for me, and Janet didn't say anything. At the time, I didn't understand, but looking back, I think everyone felt I had a right to see. I think they felt I deserved a clear story because I'm the one with someone else's blood all over my pants. I was taken inside the building into the main office. A man with a polo and jeans was seated at one of the administrator's desk, computer ready, waiting for me. With a nod from the officers that escorted me in, the man in the polo hit play. There were 9 camera shots playing at once on the screen, 3 each row, all black and white. They all played pretty much the same thing at that moment, the beginning of the lockdown. Just kids through the halls, into classrooms. Each camera just showed incoherent blurs and shifting shades of gray. In less than a minute, the blurs disappeared and the hallway was bare. My attention was then drawn to 2 screens. One showed me taking my shoes off and tiptoeing. The other showed the principal walking down the left side hallway. The principal stopped at a door and grabbed the door handle. The officer next to me said, "The school was transitioning into having new doors, correct? New locks." We were. Our doors were old and were being upgraded, which meant new locks, which meant new keys. At that point, less than half the rooms in the building had new doors, and not everyone had a key. He was checking the doors, making sure someone didn't end up in a room they didn't have a key to. Of course, I hadn't known that. With a stiff body and wide eyes, I watched my past self on the screen, cowering, truly believing I was in danger. The principal made the turn, and a moment later I was dashing to Janet's room. I was gone. Now there was only the principal. After checking a door, he seemed satisfied, like he all was finished. He leaned into the door and seemed to speak before stepping back. The hoarse whispering. It wasn't cursing, it was him tell the people inside it was only him, and not to be afraid. I saw the "Caution wet floors" sign was 3 feet away. I noticed it because something in my gut knew what was going to happen next. The principal slipped. He did a brief little shuffle, almost comedically, before his legs came out from under him. His head bounced off the floor. There was no audio, but I could hear the hollow thump. I could hear it then in my head because I had heard it in real time. That heavy thud. The one from when we shushed the boy from asking what that noise was. "Jesus, that was his head," I said aloud. No one answered. The principal slowly stood, leaving a dark splatter behind on the floor. His legs were shaky legs. He looked left and right, seemingly confused. He held one hand to his head and began to walk back the way he came. He stumbled. His knees shook. By now darkness was dripping on the floor. Then he slowly sank to the ground, as if he was suddenly sleepy and needed a nap. Then he just lay there. The man in the polo moved the computer mouse to slide the time bar to 22 minutes later. As if fast-forwarded, a dark mass appeared and grew into a perfect circle around the principal's head. The video resumed with the principal stirring. He stood and stepped back, seemingly horrified by the pool of darkness. He stepped around the puddle and walked. I squinted and saw he had dropped something. He rounded the corner, making his way to the closest room for help. Janet's room. He wavered on rubbery legs. At one point, he leaned against the wall as he walked a few steps, sliding along with his shoulder, before pushing off and trying to balance again. He finally made it to Janet's door and fell against it. We had screamed. He raised a fist and gave one strong pound before trying the knob. He patted his pockets, looked around, slumped his head, and tried the knob again. The thing he had dropped. His keys. I felt hot tears run down my cheeks as I watched him sink down to sit with his back against the door. His head drooped. And that was it. The man in the polo stopped the video but kept looking at the screen. I shook my head, feeling confused even though there was nothing to be confused about. I thought about where I had been at that point in the video. I had been sitting with my back against the bookcase, which means he and I had been sitting back to back, just feet apart, while he slowly bled out and died. And I had sat his blood, the blood that dripped from his cracked head. The children sang softly as the darkness pooled and soaked into my pants. And it was me. I had kept him out. No, I didn't know. I felt cold and afraid. I stepped back away from the officers. I didn't mean to kill him. The officer's face dropped. Wow. No. Ma'am. No, we aren't blaming you. We just felt you should know. Because I did it, right? I was losing sense of reality. I couldn't feel my legs and felt like I was somehow floating and sinking at the same time. I'm going to jail. I should. Because I fucking kept him out. Ma'am. I shoved a goddamn bookcase against the door. The officer was shaking his head, reaching out to me. I passed out. I quit being a counselor. Actually, I just stopped showing up. It was Janet who was kind enough to speak to the school county administration. She managed to turn my unannounced permanent absence into an official resignation. No one argued. No one asked me to sign or do anything. No one bothered me because they all knew. They all knew I let him die. Janet said they all feel sorry for us, her and I. That they all sympathize with our situation. But I know that's bullshit. I ripped up every get well card and popped every we miss you balloon that got delivered. They're all pretending. Acting as if I hadn't let Daniel Seymour Hutchins, a married man with 2 children at home and 253 others at work, slip away in an empty hallway, alone. I don't call him by name. I prefer to remember him as the principal. It creates some distance, like we were only coworkers. Strictly professional. Not at all like he was the shoulder I cried on when I broke up with my boyfriend, or the man who went over the spending limit for me when we did the blind gift exchange for Christmas. To top it off, we were never really in any danger. The lockdown was initiated because the police were called by a witness who claimed to see a man with a gun wandering the streets just a few blocks away, drunkenly harassing people. When the police arrived, the man was in fact very drunk and did have a gun. A brief standoff between he and the police went on for half an hour before the drunk gave up. And guess what? When the police examined the weapon, it turned out to be fake. It turned out to be a fucking paintball pistol. But that doesn't upset nearly as much as the thought that still haunts me. I could have just fucking looked. That's all I can think. There were 2 instances where I could have just looked and saved everything. The first time, I could have just poked my head around that corner and saw the principal walking my way. Then I would have put my shoes back on, step out, and give him a wave. And he would approach me and passed right by that yellow caution wet floors sign. The other time I could have looked was when I gave the second all clear to Janet and the kids. I can deny it all I want. I can it on retrospect. But I had known. I had known at that moment something wasn't right because I realized we hadn't heard any footsteps walking away from the door. So why the silence? I had thought briefly, if they were still there. At that moment, I thought about standing up, reaching across the bookshelf, and pushing the door window's curtain aside to peek out into the hallway. If I had, I would have saw the blood trail leading to the door. Then I would have looked down to see the principal slumped over. I would have shoved the shelf aside, opened the door, and used that stupid green tin blanket to apply pressure and stop the bleeding. I would have done all that, but I didn't. I didn't because protocol said stay away from the windows and doors. And plus, I was just plain scared. I ignored my gut and hid behind procedure. I was a coward. When I lay awake at night, I always hear a thump. What follows are the sounds of the principal walking and stumbling through my apartment. I can hear his feet on the linoleum even though I have carpet. I hear his shoulder brushing against the wall. Then I hear the heavy crash and knock on my closed bedroom door. I can almost see the knob jiggling. At that point, I always get up and frantically pull the bedroom door open. I do it every time. And every single night, without fail, I collapse into tears when I see no one is there. Second story. My school is on lockdown. The reason behind it is very disturbing. A 17-year-old female, go to a high school near a forest which the school forbids us to visit. My other friends and I have always wanted to see what secrets are behind those big tall trees. We have planned to sneak into the forest just before school on Thursday. It is currently Wednesday, so tomorrow will be a game changer. School was just about to end when our classroom doors locked. They were sealed shut. I stood up to see everyone in shock, and the teacher was trying to calm down the crying girl. A few minutes later, while trying to calm everyone down, we heard screams of agony. I rushed to look out the window, but before I could see anything, my teacher stepped in front of me and told me it's better if I don't see anything. I sat down, curious to what had caused that girl so much pain that she had to scream. The classroom became deadly silent. Still lost in my thoughts about the screaming girl, my eyes became heavy and I closed them for a while. I was awoken by another scream followed by more and then a loud bang. I then pushed my way through the crowd of students to the window, and what I saw next horrified not just me, but everyone who stood and looked out the window. We were all petrified of what could happen to us, if we could be their next victim. I saw this thing. I have no idea what it's called. It has long black hair. It's covered in blood. There's blood dripping from its mouth, and it's wearing a white dress that comes to its knees and had holes in it. You can see that it has been severely injured. As it sees its next victim running down the hallway, it screeches and runs on all fours, head faced backwards. It runs after the girl from class 8. I knew that girl, she was in my gym class. I sadly had to watch her slowly get devoured by the creature. I tugged on my friend's shirt and told her to see what is happening. All she said in return was, "It can sense us. We next." I felt shivers throughout my body. I felt my legs get numb. I heard a loud knock 3 times before it was dead silence. Everyone was petrified for what could happen. The girl who was crying suddenly stopped and turned to face the door. "I do not have a good feeling about this," she said to her boyfriend, whose fear was visible on his face. The one window that was open suddenly closed. It was strange because no one was anywhere near that window. I could feel that something was off. I just had no idea what. I reached down for a chair, ready to throw it at anything that came into the classroom. After seconds of having all that fear and anxiousness build up inside us, it had finally entered. As it walked, the air was heavy and the room started to smell like rotting corpse. It turned to look at the girl and her boyfriend. Its face pale white. I didn't dare to look it in its eyes, but they did. It screeched and ran at them. The way it ran made me want to puke. It looked very disturbing. I watched in horror as the creature was slowly devouring them. I took my friend's hand and ran out of the classroom, and we both looked at each other when we reached the hallway, our eyes wide open to what we were witnessing. Dead bodies laying all over the hallways. How could one creature eat so much? Unless there was more. My friend, still standing there in shock, let out a scream, which he should not have done. The creature bolted across the room, leaving the couple behind, and took my friend in its hand and munched on her. I slowly but softly went back into the classroom, trying my best not to let out loud sobs as I watched the monster eat her, piece by piece. She screamed loudly and cried out for help, but there was absolutely nothing I could do. With tears streaming down my face, I gradually closed the door. I walked to the corner of the room and sobbed, softly. The teacher called us all and told us something that was upsetting and very shocking. This information I am about to disclose has to be the most crucial part of what is happening. He told that this happens every 20 years. This creature lives in the forest, and that is why we were forbid not to enter the forest. He also said it feeds on students of this school as revenge for building the school on its homeland. The creature was a human that has been bitten by some other entity. We cannot fully explain the origin of this creature. There are some secrets that you would be better off without. We have still yet to find out what and where this entity is. I asked on how to escape from here, but all the teacher have in response was, "There's no escape. Just be quiet and don't look it in the eye, and it won't attack you unless it's extremely hungry." I am currently writing this while sitting in the classroom, still hearing it munching on other students, not caring about their screams. I have no idea how to cope with all these noises. I'm starting to lose hope. I'm wondering if we will ever get out. Everyone in the class is dead except me and one other kid who looks like he's about to burst out crying. I can't get out of here yet. I have to wait. I've been waiting for 3 days and 17 hours. I have no hope left. I still have no explanation to anything, but being here for 3 days is taking a toll on my health. I just want to leave. Third story. Lockdown procedures at White Lake Middle School will remain in effect until further notice. The police are on their way. I remember when I actually believed that. My name is Derek Fisher. I'm in the 7th grade and I'm currently holed up in the science and computer room of White Lake Middle School alongside a dozen of my friends. This started yesterday, when our principal, Mrs. Whitley, had all grades meet in the cafeteria and watch a video about gun safety. I've never considered firearms to be scary. My dad was a cop and showed me how to shoot when I was just 6 years old. But seeing that video highlights some of the senseless violence that's happened in schools across our country in just the past few years, it was a wake-up call. The procedure itself was meant to be quite simple and involved only a few steps. The teacher would announce that 2 students needed to barricade the door to whatever classroom they were currently in using a door nook. All students were to either hide under their desk, move to a secure area, or attempt to call for help. If computer services are available, use them to inform security of your current location or to contact the local authorities. Stay in shelter until the security detail has given the all-clear. Everyone agreed we would get started on the next afternoon during third period. When the drill started, everything began smoothly enough. We were told by our English teacher, Mr. Preston, to head for the second-floor lounge and wait for further instructions. Me and my best friend Bailey were given the chance to put the barricade in place and guard the door. The way it works is that only someone with a key could take the lock off the door, similar to the kind they use for cars. Mr. Preston was the only one who had it and would be the only one to decide who left and who stayed. We also decided to enact a scenario where a student might be in the bathroom when the drill started, so we took that into account and sent Bev Shriver to wait there. The plan was we would count down 3 minutes and then send someone to find Bev. In the scenario we acted out, if the person sent out took longer than 4 minutes, they would be considered dead. Then after about 15 minutes or so, Whitley would let a loud, shrill noise blast across the PA system to announce that the drill was over. As you might have already guessed, something entirely different occurred. Thinking about it now, those initial steps all seemed to fall into place perfectly. We made it to the lounge and sent Bev to the restroom on the first floor, and Mr. Preston locked all the doors, and we told security we had shelter in place. I remember a few 6th grade girls giggled as they told to pick straws to devise who would go get Bev. Starting the clock now, Mr. Preston told the short blonde that got chosen. I didn't really pay much attention, instead using those few minutes of calm to flirt with Alex Beaumont, an 8th grader I've had a crush on all semester. Where did they go? Preston asked at last. Everyone knew that if the drill was failed, that he would likely make us do it again until we got it perfect. So much of us were sighing and complaining about the missing girls. They probably ditched us to go have some real fun, Bailey sneered. A few others snickered, and even that the girls had gone to make out in the gym. Wait here, our teacher ordered as he used the keys to get out of the lounge, and then locked it back in place as Bailey and I watched him wander down the hall to find the girls. Well, great. Now what do we do if he doesn't come back? Another student complained. I think I know what I'll be doing. I teased as I copped a feel of Alex's left breast as she playfully swatted my hand away. A minute or so later, the loud klaxon went off, but he didn't come back, and frankly, none of us gave it a second thought. For the next couple of hours, we basically goofed off. A few of the kids drew or made paper airplanes. Others tried to surf the web on their phones, but the signal was abysmal. No one thought there was a problem. Not until we started hearing the screaming. That sounds like Bev, one of the girls said as they peeked out the small window toward the empty hall. The screams echoed for almost 2 minutes as all of us crowded to get a peek. I wasn't buying it, though. I thought it had to be some kind of prank. Sure enough, a few seconds later, Bev Shriver came bounding toward the door of the classroom looking like a typical horror movie girl that was being chased by a monster. She frantically grabbed at the handle, begging for us to let her in. "Dude, calm down. Mr. Preston has the keys." "What the hell has gotten into you anyway?" Bailey asked. She tried again and again to loosen the lock as she glanced back over her shoulder where I saw the silhouette of someone at the end of the hall. "You have to let me in. If you don't, he's going to kill me," Bev shouted. "It's locked, girl. Quit the drama." "Who is trying to kill you?" I asked. "Preston." "Oh God, he's here," she screamed as she pressed her back against the door. Then we heard a guttural shriek. "What the hell?" "Bev, this is not funny anymore," Alex said as we tried to get a look, but Shriver was blocking our view. The sound of something rushing toward her echoed softly against the cold tile floor as Bev screamed even louder, and then suddenly her head slammed against the small window in the middle of the door, and all of us jolted backwards in surprise. A second later, our friend slowly slid down the side of the door, and we saw standing there our English teacher with bits of Bev's face in between his teeth. "Mr. Preston?" Alex whispered as he made another low growl and pushed his body down toward the open wound of Bev's skull. We watched in horror as he began to devour her brains and rip out her spine like it was just a plaything. The entire class went into a panic. "Someone call 911, Bailey ordered. A few of us started trying to block the door even as Preston stood up and looked inside, staring at me eye to eye. Except that his pupils looked dilated as though each had a double iris within. Another confirmation that whatever this was, it wasn't our English teacher. "Help me with this," Alex said as we unplugged the refrigerator in the lounge and started to push it toward the door. Already Preston was slamming his head against the glass trying to break it apart to get inside. Meanwhile, the other students were searching for a possible exit to another part of the school. The lounge we are in connects direct to a service stairwell, but none of us had keys to get the maintenance door open, so instead they started to use a fire extinguisher to bash the handle in. "I don't think this is going to keep him held for very long," Alex said as we finished putting the fridge in place. Just as she finished her sentence, Preston finally broke through the glass, his bloody hand reaching through the door to try and grab us. He managed to snag Bailey, and I screamed as he jerked my friend toward the small window. His head hit the shattered, jagged pieces of glass as Preston tried to pull her through the small opening. Then she grabbed some of the glass and slammed it against his arm, causing the teacher to let go of him, and he tumbled to the floor gasping for breath. "Let's get out of here," someone said as they finally managed to break the lock. I don't think any of us looked back. A flurry of questions echoed amongst our group as we headed towards the second floor. What in the world happened to him? Where do we go? Did you call the cops? Alex offered an answer for that last one. They said they are on their way, and we need to find a place to hide, she said as we made it to one of the chemistry labs and pushed the door open. Another class was standing there, all of them frozen in fear as they formed a circle around someone lying on the floor. "Don't come any closer," a kid I knew named Ronnie ordered. "What the hell? It happened to your teacher too," Bailey said as he got a good look at who was writhing on the floor. They had managed to use some kind of concoction of chemicals as a weapon against whatever had taken hold of their teacher, and all of us watched in silence as she slowly melted from the burns. What was left didn't look human at all, just a gray husk that happened to share similar body parts. "Tell us how this happened," Alex said. Already we were getting a few of the massive marble tables pushed against the door we had gone through in case Preston found his way up here, as Ronnie explained the afternoon as it had transpired for them. "So like Miss Bradley told us we were going to do that whole lockdown thing, you know? So we came in here and put shelter in place. Just like we were told. It was going to last 15 minutes tops. Then she started acting funny." "How?" Bailey asked. That loud noise went off, and she said it hurt her ears. "Pacing the room, acting claustrophobic and itchy. Then she said she had to run to the restroom and told us to stay here till she got back." He turned toward the husk that was still gently convulsing on the floor and said, "It was about an hour ago she came back and claimed she got lost. Acted really shifty. We wouldn't let her in, and she got mad, scratching at the glass, and then she started spitting up this weird black slime. It killed Benjamin," a girl near the door said. I glanced over to see that the hallway was still open, and I muttered, "Get away from there. We don't know what's out there." The girl cried softly as we closed the door back, and I turned toward what remained of the teacher's body. "It looks like she is missing all of her vital organs, like an empty shell," Alex said nervously as we walked around toward the edge of the room. "I thought I saw the corpse twitch." "We need to get out of here," another kid said. Soon arguments began. The police told us to stay. What if she comes back to life? What if one of us is infected? All right, that's enough," Bailey said as he finished cleaning his wounds. "There's another teacher's lounge down the hall, probably about 100 feet. We can stay there until the police arrive," he suggested. "Why don't we stay right here?" "We got the doors all blocked," Ronnie pointed out. "And we just saw our teacher bash his head through glass to get in. So no. I'd rather be somewhere with more protection. The lounge has food, blankets, and only one way in or out without a window to break down. So I say we go there," Bailey answered. It took us another 5 minutes of debate before the decision was made for us. Preston, or some other ungodly monstrosity, was pushing against the maintenance door trying to get in, and Alex shouted, "Show us where the lounge is." It only took maybe 3 minutes to get to the lounge. 3 minutes, and I lost both my best friend and the girl of my dreams. We ran as hard and as fast as we could, but somehow the inhuman power that was inside Preston was better. I remember looking back when I heard Alex scream. Preston was blinding toward her the way a tiger would. He was climbing on the lockers and even the ceiling, his fingers smashing into the metal like claws. I knew if I stopped I would be dead too. Bailey tripped and fell, and it was over for him. Another teacher came from around the corner, their entire body covered in wounds as though exposed to sunlight had caused their fake human skin to burn off, and snarled like the devil was inside them. I can't remember much else except that we finally made it to the lounge and barricaded the door. "Holy shit!" Ronnie screamed as the adults attempted to get inside. "What is going on?" I think we all wanted the answer to that. It probably took a good half hour before my heart stopped pounding and I slumped to the floor, thinking of my 2 friends. This couldn't be happening. But over the next few hours we realized that it wasn't going to get any better. We tried to stay calm, but it was impossible. "Still nothing from the police?" Ronnie asked as he paced the room around 8th period. The final bell rang. This is when we were supposed to go home. Chances of that happening seemed slim now. The halls were quiet, but we didn't dare venture out to see where the adults had gone. They could be anywhere, waiting to trap us. This is crazy. I've checked Facebook and Instagram, Google. No one is reporting anything anywhere else. You'd think if it was an outbreak there would be news, one kid said. "I'm not getting anything from my phone," Ronnie remarked. "Unless they are in on it too," another suggested. White Lake is a pretty small town, though. I remember my dad told me once that everyone knew everyone, so I don't see how a secret as big as lizard people could be hidden, I commented. Maybe something triggered them, like that alarm they used to start the lockdown? It was like a high-pitched squeal. "I bet it set them off," Ronnie replied. I remembered it and how he said that it hurt Miss Bradley's ears, but I didn't bother to contribute to the panic that was setting in. What mattered was staying alive and waiting for help. I think we were speculating to try and keep calm. Eventually evening settled in and some of us took shifts. Others began to realize that maybe the police weren't coming after all. "We need to make a run for it," one girl insisted. "I haven't gotten anything from the cops of my parents in hours," another added. "What if we are on our own?" No one dared to consider it, but the thought had been lingering in all of our minds. The fact was, we didn't know anything about the world beyond our door. And if the cops weren't coming, then making a run for it made sense. All right, fine. We draw straws then. 2 of us go out to check it out and the rest of us wait here, I said. Maybe we should have a plan B, in case things go south? Ronnie suggested. We came to an agreement that if we needed to move locations again, the science computer room would be the easiest place to go. And we decided it would be better if we all moved as a unit rather than just blindly running. We could survive longer working together. There's access to the internet. Maybe we can send an alert out on Facebook or Reddit. Tell other people what is happening, Ronnie added. We all agreed that sounded like a good idea, even though none of us really knew for sure what the plan meant except me, I think. Alex and Bailey's death has been on my mind for nearly half the night, and I knew that stepping back into the halls could mean more senseless death. Still, staying here seemed pointless if we couldn't contact anyone. The time came to move out, and Ronnie took the lead, slowly removing the barricade, and I grabbed a fire extinguisher as a means of deterring the adults as we all slowly walked into the hall beyond. The long corridor was eerily quiet save for the sound of our own footsteps, and as we moved toward the science room, our leader Ronnie kept checking his phone for any signal. Maybe we should try to make for the front door? I suggested. It might be our only chance, Ronnie agreed. He took another step, but it was the last time he ever did. Someone's hand zipped out of a locker and struck Ronnie, grabbing and pulling him into the metallic cage they had been hiding in. I used the extinguisher and bashed it against the teacher's head, desperate to save my friend. The adult snarled and tried to tug at him even harder as I pulled Ronnie from their grasp, their nails snagging into his neck as me and several others managed to drag him to the computer room. We made it just barely before the teachers all scrambled like feral animals to get inside. Block it! Block it! Someone screamed. I tried to keep Ronnie's head elevated to prevent blood loss, but it was clear he was already beginning to choke on his own bodily fluids. I watched as the life drained from his eyes. That was about 4 or 5 hours ago. A few of us managed to find chargers for our phones inside the computer room, but none of us have heard from anyone about rescue. It's almost like our phones have been disconnected. I finally managed to activate one of the computers using an old 6th grade password, but the internet is limited. The only few websites available don't really help us much. But we've got to try something. I think it won't be long and the creatures that took over our campus are going to break in and finish us all off. Just please send help. And if help can't come, then send someone to blast us off the face of the earth. Because whatever this is, I don't want it to spread anywhere else. I just want to go home. But I'm not even sure home is still there anymore. I'm not sure anywhere is safe. I can hear them at the door. Won't be long. Please, I want to go home. Fourth story. Our school went into lockdown in 6th grade and nothing about it makes any sense. This story is old, almost 15 years old at this point. To this day, it remains probably the single most unexplained event in my entire life. Those who witnessed it seldom, if ever, speak about it. All these years later, and I'm still not sure what to make of it, so I figured posting it here may lead to some answers. I was in 6th grade at the time, but my memory of the day is as vivid now as it was then, much to my dismay. I've suffered from nightmares on and off ever since, and the true extent on my mental well-being may never be truly known. It started like any other day, with me grumpily walking to catch the school bus and nearly missing it as per norm. It was mid-September at the time, with temperate winds and comforting warmth renowned of early autumn. The place I grew up in was a small Midwestern town in the central United States. The whole school had only maybe 200 kids in it in grades 1 through 8, and my bus only brought around 20 to 30 of us. My friends Scotty and Lamar hopped on at the second stop, and the three of us discussed Yu-Gi-Oh cards most of the way to school. Maybe most of this is irrelevant, but I think it's important to emphasize how boring and routinely this whole day began. It made what happened later that much stranger. It wasn't until lunch that something finally happened. I'd met up with Scotty, Lamar, and a few of our other friends. After eating, we formed a group and went out onto the grass field to play our variation of football. The style we played was known as Smear the Deer, with deer actually being a different, rhyming word that may get me canceled for saying nowadays. For those that don't know, it was basically American football but with more youthful angst. Somebody would just punt the ball, and whoever got it would run aimlessly while praying to the good Lord above as everyone else tried to obliterate them. As you can imagine, it spawned a lot of fights and got many of us suspended over the years, and yet we kept playing because we were dumb school children. So one of the kids punts it, and this kid named Robert catches it. He made it like 3 steps before getting clobbered by like 5 kids to the laughter and winces of everyone else. Things went on that way for a bit, and at some point Kyle got the ball. Kyle was like the best punter in terms of distance, but knowing which direction it would go was anyone's guess. So Kyle boots it, and we watch as it soars far to the left and off into the woods. Our school was in the middle of this big field, and the improvised football field was right next to the woods that surrounded it all about 200 yards out. Good job, Kyle, the dumbass. Another kid, Preston, jeered. Kyle just laughed and flipped him off as he jogged towards the tree line to retrieve it. He reached it a moment later and slowly began searching the woods while the rest of us waited. I watched as he looked around in there, and suddenly he just froze up. His whole body just went stiff as a board, and he just stood there staring for like 10 seconds before someone finally yelled at him to hurry up. Kyle didn't budge, nor react to the insult in any way. Another few seconds passed before he slowly turned back to face us. That's when I noticed the slack-mouthed, wide-eyed expression on his face. Damn, Kyle, you shit your pants or something? Another kid, Carlos, said with a laugh, but Kyle's expression didn't falter. He then quickly glanced back at the woods. A split second later, and he fell onto his back, scrambling backwards and muttering frantically. Nah, fuck that man. Fuck that. He was met with a chorus of laughter from the others. Without pausing at all, Kyle just walked quickly back towards the school without another word. The others made jokes and laughed, but his reaction really unsettled me. The horror on his face appeared genuine, and I'd never seen him look like that. Kyle was the type to never seem afraid of anything, and seeing him react like he did was downright worrying. Scotty and I then silently approached the spot that Kyle had gone to, both of us now a bit hesitant. The rest of the group had now gone mostly silent, with only muttered conversation in hushed tones behind us. Once we reached the grove, we slowly peered within. I spotted the football almost right away, only about 30 feet within, but no sign of anything out of the ordinary. I'd been in that patch of woods 100 times before, and nothing looked any different. Nothing obvious that would have spooked Kyle like that. But still I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. It was a really odd feeling, but I just shrugged it off. Ignoring them, I sauntered inside to grab the ball. As soon as my hand touched it, something changed. I've still not found the best way to describe this, but the closest thing is like when a plane depressurizes. My ears popped, and my equilibrium seemed knocked off kilter for a split second. It was the weirdest feeling, and it struck me completely out of nowhere. After pausing for a moment to confirm I wasn't about to pass out or something, I grabbed the ball and stood back up. As soon as I did, I felt something on the back of my neck. Hot air coming in rhythmic and rancid waves, like someone was literally breathing down my neck. I spun back around, heart suddenly racing in my chest. There was nothing behind me aside from Scotty standing and staring unsettled back at me. "You good, dude?" he asked. Truth be told, I didn't know whether I was or not, or how to account for what had just happened, but I nodded back anyways. Part of me wondered whether it was just anxiety or something, but I didn't really know what to think. As a young boy in middle school, though, admitting to fear was social suicide and not something I was about to do. "You didn't see anything behind me, did you?" Scotty gave me a curious glance. "No, why?" It was clear to me he wasn't laying, and he was standing much too far away for it to have been him messing with me somehow. Furthermore, I heard no footsteps behind me, and if it had been him, then the piles of leaves on the ground would have been a dead giveaway. With an uncertain shiver, I shrugged it off as best I could, and the two of us returned to the others with the ball. I didn't play much after that, as my mind was suddenly convinced that something was very wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint it. It felt like someone was watching us, hidden well within the trees. Eventually, I decided to go try and find Kyle, but the bell rang before I could. Math was my next class, and I spent most of it trying to forget that unnerved feeling and calm myself down. Things went as normal, but after about 20 minutes I felt myself needing to pee. The teacher excused me to go to the restroom, and I grabbed the hall pass from her desk as I exited the classroom. As I made my way down the hall, I noticed that outside had gotten suddenly dark. Not dark enough for night, but dark like a thick overcast of clouds. Since the sun had been shining brightly during lunch, I found that kind of odd too, but didn't think much more of it. As mentioned earlier, our school was small in terms of students and faculty, so of course the building itself was no exception. It was only about 75,000 square feet, or about 20,000 smaller than the average Walmart. It was just outside our hometown, and about half a mile away from the local police station. The lights flickered when I was in the bathroom washing my hands. Again, not something super unusual as the school was old and prone to the occasional electrical mishap. They stabilized a moment later, and I made my way out back into the hallway. As soon as I exited the bathroom, I froze. The outside window had gotten much darker than before, like it was suddenly the middle of the night. My initial thought was cool, a solar eclipse. But as someone emerged from the office, that thought evaporated. A familiar middle-aged man hustled into the hallway, scrambling to the front doors and quickly locking them. It was our school principal, and as he turned to face me standing in the hall behind him, I saw an unrivaled terror etched upon his face. "Get back to your class now. Tell your teacher Code Silver." My heart sunk as I heard the words, and I realized the deadly seriousness in his voice. Without a word, I sprinted back to the classroom, flinging the door open and scrambling inside as I got one last look behind me. The entire environment seemed to have flipped in an instant, and something was very wrong. My teacher, Mrs. Smith, scolded me in an annoyed tone as I re-entered. I turned back from the door and stared at her. Her expression seemed to slowly turn from cross to visibly concerned. "Code Silver," I muttered out. Mrs. Smith's eyes went wide. "Lock the door. Everyone into the corner, now," she commanded. The students did as requested, quickly filing into the corner and out of sight from the door. I locked the door and Mrs. Smith rushed towards me to ensure it was secure. After which she rushed back to her desk, dialed a few numbers in her desk phone and spoke. Her voice blared over the intercom, reiterating the lockdown order for all others in the school. Everyone packed together tightly into the corners, out of sight of the door. The entire class then hunkered down as we had practiced many times before. Once there, Mrs. Smith doused the lights, and everything fell eerily silent. The next few moments we heard the faint sounds of the next-door classrooms likely doing the same as all of us held our breath. Most American kids probably know that Code Silver is the national alert given for an active shooter. Anyone who attended a school in the States probably remembers practicing the lockdown drills at one point or another. Basically, the whole class just locks the doors and hides together in the corner. The only defense is the locked door and hope that whatever danger is outside will not be able to get in. "What did you see out there, Eric?" one of the girls in the class whispered to me. Mrs. Smith shushed the both of us before I could reply. I pondered the same question in silence as we all waited. The sounds of the other classrooms soon hushed as well. The entire vicinity fell eerily quiet as all of us waited like fish trapped in a barrel. The more I thought about the way the principal reacted, the less sense it made. I hadn't seen anything to indicate an active shooter and just assumed that he had. And yet still, I had no explanation for how things had suddenly gone so dark. It wasn't like a school shooter could affect the weather, and the windows were far too large for someone to have covered them so quickly. Something very different was happening. The hallway lights extinguished a few minutes later, leaving us alone in silence and sudden complete darkness. Even the windows in the classroom didn't show any light from beyond, and the darkness became so thick I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. We stayed like that for several minutes before a sudden calamity struck. It sounded like the shattering of glass and creaking of metal. My heart was throbbing in my chest then, and the muffled sounds of crying and whimpering from the other students surrounded me. Mrs. Smith shushed us all, trying her best to maintain order. By that point my eyes had adjusted a bit to the darkness, and I could see Mrs. Smith looking through the door's side windows. Silence befell once more, a lingering malaise which lasted several minutes. Suddenly Mrs. Smith audibly gasped and backed away from the window. I saw her hold her index up to her lips and could see tears sparkle in her eyes. Suddenly the room began to grow brighter. I thought the power was coming back on when I realized the light was actually coming from something out in the hallway. It was a bright effervescence with a very slight reddish tint that softly shimmered. The light seemed to flicker ever so slightly, like that of a flashlight losing power, but different somehow. In the years since I've tried to replicate that light using various other light sources, but I've never quite gotten it right. It wasn't a flashlight or open flame producing the light, that much I'm certain of, and I can't say for certain what it was. A sound emerged along with it, sounding like wet, squishy footsteps as though someone were trudging through a swamp. They came closer, and the light grew brighter. In a few seconds it seemed to be directly outside the classroom door, and I could literally feel the other students hold their breaths. A slight thud hit the door, and none of us dared make a sound. The door handle jiggled slightly, but from our vantage point none of us could see who or what was on the other side. The light seemed to flicker and change intensity outside, beaming through the windows in altered variations. We were hunkered down perpendicular to the door, meaning the light couldn't reach us so long as it stayed outside. We could only hide there and offer silent prayers that whatever was making the light wouldn't get in. By some miracle it didn't, and several seconds later the jiggling handle stopped. The footsteps then grew distant, and the light faded. The relief was palpable, but it did not last. Perhaps a minute later, and a sudden, shrill, ear-piercing scream rang out down the hall, one that seemed cut short at its apex. The sounds of slight skirmish ensued with crashing and thumping. It was over in just a few seconds, and the uncomfortable silence returned. It went on that way for hours, with me and the other students hiding in the darkness. We heard more screams and other noises at certain points, but whatever was out there never returned to our door. At some point the darkness outside finally relented, and it seemed as though the sun was beginning to rise. I know that wasn't the case because my wristwatch told me it was just before 5 p.m., seeming to affirm that discovery was the fact that the sun was still high in the sky and not anywhere near the horizon. A few minutes later, and the sounds of police sirens emerged. Dozens of police and even a SWAT team swarmed the building soon after, ushering all of us out from within room by room. The sense of relief was indescribable as they let us out, but not without a modicum of confusion. Several windows and doors were shattered, and parts of the hallways had been damaged as well, with parts of the hall even appearing melted. Some of the lockers were slumped and malformed like an intense heat had been focused on them. I don't know how that would be possible without causing a fire, but that's apparently what had happened. Once I finally stepped outside, I found my parents waiting for me along with my older sister. They hugged me tighter than ever before, as dozens of other families around us did the same. Behind us, I noticed the police sectioning off the school with barriers and tape as though it were an active crime scene. I questioned my parents on what had happened, but they didn't say much. We returned home and allowed the cops to conduct their investigation, and that's when everything got a lot stranger. Later that same day, I started feeling nauseous and proceeded to puke my guts out for the remainder of the evening. The headache I got then was by far the worst I've ever experienced. My parents at first thought it was an aftermath of the trauma, until some of the other parents said the same thing happened to their kids. Before I even knew what was happening, a bunch of dudes in biohazard equipment show up. They run a bunch of tests on me and tell me to remain calm. My parents and sister were separated from me, and I didn't see them for several days afterwards. The obvious concern was that myself and the other kids that felt sick had contracted some sort of virus. And with the previous events at the school, people were worried it was some sort of bioweapon terrorist attack. Thankfully, I woke up the following day feeling loads better. The medical personnel continued running tests, but everything looked relatively normal. Eventually, they made the discovery that our sickness was not due to a viral agent, bacteria, or mold, but instead due to radiation exposure. Thankfully, it wasn't enough to do serious, long-term damage, but obviously explaining it was another matter entirely, one which we have yet to resolve. Our school was closed for almost a month after this event, which at the time was fantastic news for me. Once we were finally allowed to return to school, we were given zero explanation and just basically expected to forget anything ever happened. There were never any news reports, nor interviews or articles of any kind. It's like the whole thing never happened, and were it not for the memories of those who lived through it, there would not be any record at all. Kyle, the same kid from earlier, ended up not showing up for his English class directly following lunch period. For a while, people thought he had something to do with the lockdown, and hell, maybe he did, but I doubt we'll ever know now. He hasn't been seen since that day almost 15 years ago now, and he's not the only one. Our school's principal, the same guy I'd seen in the hall, along with one of the school's janitors, also vanished, never to be seen again. Police found no bodies, nor evidence of abduction or physical conflict, at least not that they're willing to admit publicly. There are no death certificates for any of them, and all three are simply listed as missing, and I doubt that's going to change anytime soon. I've questioned my parents about this, and they claim all the police told them was that a dangerous fugitive had broken into the school that day. A dangerous fugitive who apparently was capable of summoning eclipses, melting lockers, and tearing metal doors from their hinges. Not to mention the whole radiation thing as well. That's another thing too. There is no record of a solar eclipse on that day, and I've looked everywhere I can think to. We weren't allowed anywhere near the school for weeks afterwards. Cops sectioned off the streets that led to it, while others patrolled the surrounding woods. On several occasions, we saw guys in blacked-out Suburbans and cargo vans driving down there, but they never formally identified themselves. I overheard my parents talking back then once, and I remember my dad telling my mom that he didn't think the school would ever reopen. He said it didn't feel the police were conducting a routine investigation, and told her the entire thing seemed more like a cover-up than a crime scene. I've asked them more recently as well, but they seem to have learned very little. I've shared this experience with them too, and although they agree it was weird and disturbing, they don't seem to have any further theories. I've spoken to others who were there that day too, and gotten all manner of mixed responses. Lamar seems to think we were attacked by aliens, while Scotty seems to think our entire school fell into a separate dimension for a period of time. Maybe there is a logical and boring explanation to all of this, but I have yet to find it. Considering the secrecy, the lack of coverage, and the way the authorities behaved, I'd say it's safe to conclude that something out of the ordinary happened that day, but we may never know what. Whatever it was, I think Kyle saw it, and I think that's why he's gone. When the school finally reopened, it never quite felt the same. We ended up finishing out that year, but it wasn't without incident. Multiple students I know claimed to have seen things they couldn't explain in that building. Everything from ghosts and demons to wild animals. A few students even suffered full-on mental breakdowns and panic attacks while in the old school. I even know of at least one girl who spent some time in a psyche ward afterwards. Perhaps most of it could be attributed to PTSD related to the lockdown. Or maybe there was something far more sinister at play. Nightmares and bouts of sleep paralysis followed me for years after this event, and I still get them every once in a while, even now. I never know how to describe them, but I wouldn't wish them on anyone. I've always hoped that one day I'd be able to look back on this event with hindsight and understand that it was only scary because I was a kid, like I imagined it wrong or didn't understand. I still can't say I understand what happened, but I can't help but feel more worried now than I was then. As a kid, life goes on and you forget, but as an adult, you end up just ruminating on it over and over until coming to a worrying realization. We as humans set up these systems, ways of life, and comfort zones, but there are things out there that can and sometimes will bypass all of them. Things that are far beyond our understanding that we have little power against, and sometimes we got shown firsthand what those things are truly capable of. Fifth story. A silent school lockdown. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, but mostly just the worst of times. I was in English class when they found the first body. We were right at the end of class when over the PA system we heard, "Lockdown, lockdown, lockdown." Naturally, everyone in the classroom immediately started freaking out and talking to each other while Mr. Tannerty locked the classroom door. Mr. Tannerty walked over to the windows to see outside. Our classroom is right next to the front entrance to the school. I got up to walk over to the window, but Mr. Tannerty looked over at me with a nervous face and told me sit down. So this classroom is a little weird. We don't have individual desks. Instead, we have 2 columns of big white tables that are attached to the ground. You can't climb under them. So instead, we are supposed to sit down by the back wall. About half the students were lining up back there, while the other half were trying to get a glimpse out of the window. "Everybody get to the back wall," says Mr. Tannerty while staying by the window. We all get up and start making our way back. I immediately start moving towards my friend Clark. Clark sits towards the front of the room and could easily see out the front window. "What did you see out there, man?" Clark's face showed he was way more concerned than I was currently feeling. "There was more cop cars than I've ever seen in my life, dude," his voice trembling. Vanessa was listening and chimed in, "Do you think it's a shooting?" Hearing her say the word shooting started to raise my nerves. "I don't know, but I didn't hear any gunshots, did you guys?" "No," Vanessa said. "Me neither," said Clark. Mr. Tannerty started walking over to us. "Hey guys, let's." The PA system interrupted his sentence. "Students and teachers, please stay in your classrooms and leave the door locked. If you can, barricade your class doors with desks and stay away from the windows. We are trying to get this situation under control." I didn't recognize the voice. Now I was officially nervous. Everyone else must have been also, because the class went quiet. We all just stared up at Mr. Tannerty, waiting to see his response. All right, kids, we're going to just wait for the police to come and get us. We all sat and talked amongst ourselves, everyone throwing out their theories of what was going on. School shooting was the most obvious, but no one had heard any type of gunshots. The chatting was interrupted by a massive scream. "No, please." It was a woman's voice, and when she said, "please," it sounded like a shriek. Some kids covered their ears. I don't know if it was because it was of how loud the scream was, or if it was just because it sounded like the woman was scared for her life. The room went absolutely silent. There was no gunshot, bang, or anything that would indicate that person got hurt. She didn't scream again. Why did she go quiet? The PA system came back on again. "Please remain quiet. If you can't remain calm, we can't get you guys out of this situation. Screaming or fighting only makes this situation worse." The voice coming from the PA was different than the one that spoke to us earlier. It was much deeper and raspy, like an old woman who smoked cigarettes all her life. Everyone sat quietly, looking at their phones for any indication of what was going on. The very few who could started making phone calls. Our school has terrible reception. Phones don't work at all, unless you have Verizon. And even then, the only place you can call out is in the library. Mr. Tannerty walked over to the front window and looked outside. He looked back at us, and you could see his face was clearly perplexed. He walked back over and kneeled next to us. "All right, kids, I know you're scared, but we're going to be all right. What I want to do is just look outside the door and see what is going on. Maybe try to talk to another teacher." I jumped up quickly. "Mr. T, you can't. Something weird is clearly going on. Mr. Tannerty, someone clearly hurt that screaming woman. We should just stay here," said Vanessa, clearly terrified. Clark chimed in. "Why don't we just sit and wait for the cops?" Mr. Tannerty stood up. Guys, there are no cops. What are you talking about? Said Clark. I don't know, guys. There were a ton of cops here a few minutes ago, and now there are none. I have no clue what is going on. I really need to figure it out. Mr. Tannerty walked over to the class door and turned back to us. Just sit here and wait for me to come back. Mr. Tannerty slowly cracked the big wooden door, peeking outside as he did it. The creaking from the door opening was so loud since both us and the hallway were so quiet. When he got the door open wide enough, he stuck his head out, looking both ways. He looked back at us and gave us an okay hand gesture and a head nod. Then he stepped outside and shut the door behind him. Both our class and the school were so quiet we could hear his footsteps. He was moving quickly, clearly showing he was nervous. He knocked on the door right next to ours with 3 big knocks. No one answered. He knocked again, this time saying, "Hey, it's Mr. Tannerty. Are you guys okay?" After a brief pause, Mrs. Gardner responded from inside the classroom. "We're all okay in here, Mr. T. I think you should go back into your classroom. We're all just waiting for this to end." "Mrs. Gardner, can you just open up? I really want to try to figure out what's going on here." "Mr. T, I don't know anything more than you, and I really don't think there's any reason for me to open the door. Just go back to your classroom." "All right, everything. What the fuck?" "No, stop. Stop." There was no other sound. No bangs, slices, footsteps, nothing. Just Mr. T scream and then silence. Some people in our classroom screamed. Some cried, but most were just silent. I jumped up and Clark stopped me. "Where are you going, dude?" "I gotta make sure Mr. T locked the door," I said while walking quickly to the door. I started to slow down when I noticed the shadows coming from under the door. It looked like there were 2 people standing outside our door. I could see the door handle from where I was, and the door was locked. The door handle lightly jiggled, but only for a second. I slowly backed away and went to the back wall to sit with the others. Everyone saw the shadows. We were all quiet, all exchanging looks of fear. What just happened to Mr. T? We all jumped a little when the PA system kicked back on again. It was the same raspy voice from earlier. "Students and staff, we want to thank you for cooperating with us. The situation has been dealt with. Please unlock your classroom doors and wait in your classroom for one of us to come and free you." Everyone in the class started to slowly get up. You could see the look of relief on everyone's face. As we stood up, I noticed the shadows are still under the door. I got a weird feeling. I don't know why, but those shadows gave me chills. "Guys, wait. Let's just give it a few minutes." Vanessa looked at me. "Why?" "I want to get out of here as soon as possible. Look at the shadows under the door. They haven't moved. They're making me nervous," I said, not really being able to explain myself. "Yeah, they are obviously here to get us out of here," Vanessa said. I looked back for Clark, but I noticed he was over by Mr. T's desk. I walked over to him. "What are you doing, man?" Clark looked at me, and I could tell he was still freaked. "Dude, look at everyone. No one is going to wait to unlock that door. I am with you, though I really don't trust whoever is causing those shadows underneath the door. I'm going to hide under Mr. T's desk until I know for sure those shadows are on our side." "Yeah, I'm climbing under there with you, man," I said as I climbed underneath the desk with Clark. Vanessa started walking to the door. The 2 sets of legs were still casting their shadows underneath the door. She unlocked the door and went back to sit with the other 17 students in the group. We sat there for 2 minutes until finally the door handle started turning. Most of the students were back against the wall. Me and Clark were under Mr. T's desk. You could kind of see the door between a slight crack from where the surface of the desk meets the base of the desk. The door was opening towards us, so the group could see who was coming in before we could. "Oh, what is that?" Vanessa screamed before we could see anything. The door opened a bit more and I saw him, or it. Its head was circular and bald. It had rows of tiny teeth that were sharp like a shark's tooth. It had 4 legs, at the end of them 2-fingered hands with extremely sharp nails on the end. It walked like a spider, its back lower than its knees. It didn't make any noise. Its silence made it feel fake. How can it take steps without making a noise? How can it open and close its mouth without making a sound? Everyone in the room started screaming. The thing went flying towards the group and out of mine and Clark's sight. Just like when Mr. T and the woman were attacked, all we heard were screams. Students screaming no and begging please. Then they would be cut off in the middle of whatever they were saying. Two guys tried running for the door. The thing jumped on one of them and bit his shoulder. He opened his mouth to scream, but nothing came out, almost as if the thing's silence spread to him. The thing then stuck its two big nails into the side of the kid's head and pushed, which caused the boy to collapse immediately. The other student made it into the hall, but the thing was on him instantly. He screamed, please, 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 as the thing took a bite out of his side. Then the silence infected him as well. He received the same fate as the first two boys. Two big nails to the face. The PA system burst back on. All students and staff, please leave your classrooms. Everything is safe. Everyone is clear to go home. So now what do we do? Everything is silent. I know the monsters are still out there even if I can't hear them. No one is coming to save us. Clark and I are still sitting under this desk. Sitting silently. I've been trying to make calls to anyone, but my calls just won't go through. I managed to gain the courage to get up and grab Mr. T's laptop. There's no way to make phone calls or anything from it. The school doesn't have Wi-Fi for us to access on our cell phones. The monster hasn't come back to the room. I assume because it assumes everyone in here is dead. I don't know what to do at this point. All I could do is upload this post hoping you guys can give me some suggestions on what to do. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.